So there are places around the internet, and in the real world too, where there are people who will offer to give you an overpriced massage. Now, unless you were born yesterday, I probably don't need to tell you that the actual massage is not really what you pay the price of the admission for. This experience is meant to be more about the happy ending than the actual massage. The funny thing about these massages is that we keep calling them massage, even though we all know the score.
It's only massage or it's also a blowjob?
It's even funnier that there are quite a few customers out there who would walk away frustrated and angry from a massage service if they ended up getting only an actual massage. Some may even want their money back.
Somebody sucking my dick, or am I getting 1,000 pesos?
See, RPGs are a little bit like these massages I'm telling you about. We keep calling these games RPGs. We keep buying them and enjoying them, and we're even okay with the fact that there's barely any role-playing to be done in them. Some people even buy some of these titles hoping there won't be too much RP in their RPGs. And when it comes to massages, I know who to blame for this semantic conundrum, but I can't quite put a finger on who started the RPG confusion. It might have been the original Wizardry. This game came out originally in 1980. And 7 years later, it was released for the NES and labeled as RPG. But other than creating your party and naming your characters, there wasn't much role-playing to be done in the original Wizardry.
You mean you couldn't do the innocent maid and strict master thing?
No, that's not what I meant, but you certainly couldn't do that. You couldn't be the cynical rogue making smart-ass remarks about how fucked up the situation was. You couldn't be the goody-doing Boy Scout on a crusade for justice and honor, or the silver-tongued charlatan weaseling your way through the game. Wizardry was hardly the exception back in the day, though. I feel like D&D video games have not always delivered on the role-playing part of the equation. It's not like we haven't had a game or two that have gotten it right, but there have been many more that have chosen to focus on other aspects of the gameplay formula, like my friend...
What?
Like the many Filipino massage specialists who tend to focus a little more on the happy ending. But I've always been keen on a good massage.
So this is relaxation.
Don't get me wrong, I won't shy away from a good happy ending. But I feel like most of the effort and thought should go to the massage part of the experience, and that's why I appreciate when developers put a little extra effort in the RP part of the RPG formula. Back in the day, we had Troika. Their games weren't perfect. Atrocious combat, glitches, bugs, long loading screens, unbalanced classes, and skill trees were some of Troika's trademarks in the early 2000s. But where else could you play as a single-digit IQ ogre moron? Where else could you play as an insane vampire who picks fights with random traffic signs? Where else could you have sex with a sheep just because? Fuck it. Nowhere, that's where. And it's not like the world didn't give a shit about those choices. Playing as a Nosferatu in Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines forced you to avoid the surface altogether and stick to the sewers, because Nosferatu were too damn ugly, and just showing your face in a public place would be enough to break the masquerade and make people panic and call the cops. Incredibly dumb characters in Arcanum had less dialogue options, and the ones that they did have were hilariously stupid. And the world around you mocked you, treated you like an idiot, or tried to take advantage of you. It was role-playing at its best. So when I learned that a D&D game that had been developed by Troika was out and about, I thought,
it's a match made in heaven.
If anyone could put the RP back in D&D RPGs, it had to be Troika. So as soon as I had the chance, I acquired Temple of Elemental Evil and jumped right into it. And, well, I guess the best thing I can say about Temple of Elemental Evil before we even get to the review is that Troika was not only capable of putting together worlds and stories that players could navigate however they wished, they were also able to implement pretty fucking amazing combat. Unfortunately, it seems like they couldn't do both of these things in the same game. Welcome to Ye Olde Entertainment. My name is Alex, and it is my duty, my mission, my purpose in life to help you decide whether that game that you have been thumping for so long is indeed the right game for you or not. And today, we have one of the juicy ones, because some people, like Steve Jackson, say stuff like this. Temple of Elemental Evil was a giant pile of steaming dog turd. And some others, like Multiverse and Forgal 7, say stuff like this. Temple of Elemental Evil is probably the best implementation of 3.5. Temple of Elemental Evil needs to be shared more with people. And yet some others, like yours truly, feel like the truth is kinda somewhere in between. So join me as we embark upon the journey to seek the truth.
You can't handle the truth!
Okay, fine then. Join me as we explore my opinions on the game. So let's get to it. Character creation and character progression are up first. Of all the D&D games that came out in the early to mid-2000s, Temple of Elemental Evil probably has my favorite character creation and leveling system. Back in the day, there were games which allowed you to create an entire party of adventurers, but some of them had plenty of potential companions of their own, each of which had their own stories, quests, interactions, and many of them had a load of voiced dialogue lines, while player-made companions had, well, none of that. Others allowed the creation of an entire party of adventurers, but there were no in-game alternative companions for you to choose from. Temple of Elemental Evil allows the player to create adventurers with which to build his or her own party. Many other games like the Icewind Dale series, Storm of Sahir, the second expansion for Neverwinter Nights 2, or more recently Solasta Crown of the Magister, also work this way. But what's fascinating about Temple of Elemental Evil is that you can choose to go solo all the way. You can create an entire party of adventurers from the get-go, or you can pick scripted companions along the way. And there's something very pleasantly Troikish about this, and it's that the game plays out in a significantly different way depending on which of these approaches you decide to go for. Having an entire player-created party with a decent distribution of skills will allow you to pretty much overcome every non-combat situation in the best possible way, while picking up companions will add a bit more interaction, and perhaps a greater sense of purpose to what you're doing. You can also go solo if you're up for the ultimate masochistic D&D challenge, and this adds a great deal of replay value. At the time of your character's creation, you can choose some pretty standard 3.5 edition D&D stuff. You roll dice to populate your attributes, and there are races, classes, feats, skills, weapon proficiencies, and, depending on your class, some initial spells for you to choose from. There's also alignments and other stuff like voices and portraits to further fine-tune your character. There are 7 races and 11 classes available in Temple of Elemental Evil, and as you level up and progress through the game, you can even choose to multi-class at your leisure. I've never been a huge fan of multi-classing, but in Temple of Elemental Evil, locations and combat encounters are designed in a way that makes any form of multi-classing endlessly rewarding. If it's the product of common sense, of course. This is also true of the rest of the options available to you during character creation. There are plenty of non-combat situations in Temple of Elemental Evil that may be navigated in different ways, and this depends heavily on your character's skills. Detecting secret doors goes a long way in Temple of Elemental Evil, and a high level of persuasion can help you solve matters that would otherwise be unresolvable. There's this passage early in the game in which you can wear a disguise, or talk your way through narrow corridors in an area filled with tough-ass sons of bitches and enter the boss's office and ambush the dude there and then. The boss is capable of healing himself and his allies, so being able to take him down first is quite the blessing. If you don't use a disguise, and/or if you don't have a good enough persuasion skill, you're in for one of the toughest fights in the game. Also, the game cares, at least a little, about your race and your class. Saying anything else would be spoiling it to you, so I'll leave it at that. I'm no expert in D&D rules, as you might have gathered from watching these many videos, and I've never been a tabletop D&D guy, so I don't expect the game to deliver the closest possible experience to the real thing. I just want my character creation and leveling mechanics to be useful and robust enough for me to navigate the game my way. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. It's not about the number of options at your disposal. They can be few, they can be plentiful, heck, they can even be non-existent. It's about how useful they are for you to navigate the game's challenges and its content your way. And I would say Temple of Elemental Evil delivers in spades in this regard. Gameplay. Yes, Troika has given us some of the most fabulous questing and also great combat, just never in the same game, unfortunately. RPGs are almost always about combat, exploration, questing, puzzle solving, and sometimes about role-playing. Temple of Elemental Evil has combat and exploration alright, but questing has been replaced with FedEx delivery simulation. And after playing Arcanum and Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, I never thought I'd say this, but questing in Temple of Elemental Evil sucks. It sucks more than my Filipino friend after the massage has been paid for. Questing is the lowest of the low in Temple of Elemental Evil. It's fetch quest low. It's can't do this until you talk to this character first low. It's go to such place because plot low. And hey, it's not like this type of quests can't work in RPGs. Actually, most quests in most RPGs are nothing but glorified fetch quests. But there's nothing glorious about quests in Temple of Elemental Evil. The writing is, talk to my boss because I want to convert to such religion. Your persuasion level's not good enough? Then fuck off. Your persuasion level's good enough? Okay, tell Father MacGuffinus that I'll allow it. And that's it. That's pretty much all there is to it. Nothing relevant is ever at stake with these quests either. It's all about convincing the leader of the militia to recruit the local tailor, or settling a family dispute that you couldn't care less about, or getting a monster's head to get better prices from the blacksmith. It's just plain filler. And yes, there are some quests that can be completed in more than one way, but none of it amounts to anything. To add insult to injury, completing most of these quests gives less experience than killing random groups of enemies who try to ambush you while you're traveling between locations. This is still a Troika game, and glimpses of the Troika we used to know shine through here and there. For example, there's this item that you come by at some point that, much later in the game, if you remember that you have it, will allow you to recruit a certain companion and make use of a certain resting place. There's also a bad guy who will yield in battle and ask for mercy. You can then choose to kill him and retrieve some quest items that you can give to another would-be companion as part of his quest, or you can choose to pardon him and ask him to join you. And these are just a few examples. And again, this is still a Troika game, so expect there to be different endings, one of which,
mind spoilers coming your way,
entails circumventing the final combat encounter altogether. But in Arcanum, for example, every possible ending felt deserved. They were the result of your choices throughout the entire game. In Temple of Elemental Evil, there are literally only 2 decision nodes in the game that have a relevant impact on how things play out in the finale, and both of them are near the end, and do not depend on your previous choices. What the hell happened to you, Troika? Anyway, that's the bad news. Let's talk about the good news. Exploration is pretty interesting in the bigger locations of the game. There are hidden doors that allow you to navigate the game in more than one way, and some areas are connected in interesting Dark Soulish ways. And I don't know about you, but whenever I discover shortcuts or passageways that connect locations in unexpected ways, I always get a bit of a feeling of accomplishment. The Temple of Elemental Evil itself is of course the one big dish, and there's a lot to discover here while you're exploring, from juicy loot to hidden areas. Unfortunately, there's no exploration to be done in the world map as there is in Arcanum. Traveling from one location to another will occasionally be interrupted by random encounters, but that of course doesn't count as exploration. And then of course there's combat. And I happen to think the combat in Temple of Elemental Evil is
amazing.
I know I've shown you this chart already, but after playing Temple of Elemental Evil again for this review, I might have even changed my mind a bit. This is probably my second favorite combat amongst those RPGs that came between the late 90s and the mid 2000s. And as far as turn-based combat goes, this is up there with more recent games like Divinity Original Sin 2, Solasta Crown of the Magister, and Underrail. I've always had a love-hate relationship with D&D RPGs. Whenever I start a new one, I'm always worried about those combat encounters that you simply cannot beat unless you know its specific rock, paper, scissors deal. Oh, so your spellcasters don't have Pierce Magic, Pierce Shield, or Ruby Ray of Reversal? Well then fuck you. Oh, so you do have these spells? Piece of cake. Figuring out how to use your spells in the most efficient way, using kiting, choking point, flanking, and high ground tactics, having your tank engage the enemy first, and then turn it around so that it can use its sinister initial AoE talent on your entire party, that's where the fun's to be had, my dudes. Not in idiotic trial and error amongst endless spells and spell protections to see what works. Set trial and error always ends up becoming a game of references, and that just doesn't work for video games in my estimation. It's cool to read about encounters in which wizards use spells and counter spells on each other, as it happens in these choose-your-own-adventure books, but for games, it's not a great plan. But I'm happy to report that there are very few combat encounters that are narrowed down to a rock, paper, scissors deal in Temple of Elemental Evil. You have the occasional troll that can only be defeated with fire and acid, and a few other similar baddies, but if you've played any D&D game, I'm sure you'll know the score. Combat is challenging and encounters are diverse in nature. There are doors that close unexpectedly, leaving some companions out of the fight. There are ambushes, fights in narrow corridors, and all matters of enemies with all sorts of attacks and tactics. Some combat encounters are just plain fucking epic. I absolutely love that the difference between being hopelessly crushed like a fly and coming out on top almost unscathed is almost always a good use of tactics. There are of course good and bad builds, and some party configurations are better than others. But your decisions during the fight make a world of difference, and that's how I like my turn-based encounters. Solasta Crown of the Magister also uses turn-based combat, but I don't know if 5th edition's to blame for this, or if it's its design, but I found combat to be a little too easy even in the highest difficulty levels. But that's not how it is with Temple of Elemental Evil. Combat here is epic and challenging as fuck, but it never becomes frustrating. You also have your regular cast of D&D baddies like Edins, Umber Hulks, Trolls, Elementals of all kinds, you name it. After playing through Arcanum's and Vampire the Masquerade Bloodline's half-baked, bug-ridden combat, which inevitably boiled down to choose your cheese tactic at some point, I was very positively impressed with the combat in Temple of Elemental Evil. The Circle of 8 mod pack even adds an arena challenge, new characters, locations, quests, and challenges, and even a way to circumvent the FedEx simulation part of the game. Itemization in Temple of Elemental Evil is decent. There are some pretty powerful items to be discovered by means of exploration, and more importantly, as loot from boss encounters. This makes the toughest fights in the game even more rewarding. You should be warned though, the amount of garbage that you do get in this game is too damn high, even when compared to its peers from back in the day. So yes, for me, questing is always an important part of the transaction when it comes to RPGs, just as much as the massage part of the experience is the most important thing when it comes to, the massage. But ever so often there's a game that gives you this one thing that somehow manages to short-circuit the thinking part of your brain so that you end up not giving a shit about the one thing that you supposedly paid the price of the admission for. And this one thing in Temple of Elemental Evil is the combat. Yes, the main campaign is garbage quest-wise, but I just didn't care this time around, because it's all about the fun factor, and in Temple of Elemental Evil, after the FedEx simulation part of the game is over, it's off the charts. Story and lore. It's hot garbage. Yes, there is no way to candy coat this one. It's the tropiest of the tropiest. It's predictable, it's low effort, it's just an excuse for you to go out there and kill the baddies. And I don't care how much of the game is meant to be all about the combat, I want my story to matter. Yes, there are a couple of moderately interesting things hidden away within the dark confines of the story, but nothing noteworthy. There's this prostitute who seems to be, underperforming at the brothel in Nulb. And if you figure out she's into women, you can help her and the brothel, diversify their offer, I suppose. There's also the rivalry between different temples, and the fact that you can use this to your advantage to progress deeper in the Temple of Elemental Evil, but that's about it. Solasta Crown of the Magister had an atrocious story that was held together by the most laughable string of plot conveniences. It was dumb and tropey, but there were moments like this.
Who else? Even without Airdroth, Bloodspear never followed Yarks.
Yarks? Huh, that's us, just so you know. Probably means piece of...
It means non-orcs, that's all.
You speak Orcish?
Enough to know non-orc from piece of...
Really? Oh, please, what's the word? I must know.
And the camaraderie between your party members was naive but endearing, and it all worked well enough for you to care about them. Temple of Elemental Evil is every bit as bad as Solasta in this respect, except for the fact that it has no funny, endearing, cheesy party banter nor anything else to make you care about your characters. Take for example Elmo. Yes, the guy's name is Elmo. Elmo's a drunken disgrace of a lad, and his parents even seem to show some concern when you talk to them about him. Okay, so maybe we can recruit Elmo and ask him to stay off the roof for the remainder of the adventure. Cool then, he joins you and becomes an important party member. That should be enough for you to go back to his parents with Elmo so that they can see how much he's changed and rejoice, right?
Wrong.
Nope, the game doesn't give a flying fuck. Okay, so Elmo's brother Otis is mentioned in a conversation with Elmo's parents. It seems like these people miss their son. Also, if Elmo falls in battle, he says, "I'm a goner, tell my brother Otis." You would think this Otis guy is important then, right?
Wrong.
When you meet the guy in the city of Nulb, his brother has absolutely nothing to say to you, or him. Nothing. Nada. Zippity-doo-dah. Okay, so perhaps if I go back to the city of Hamlet where his parents live and pay a visit to the lads, they'll be happy to see both of their sons. Nope, the game doesn't give a shit about any of that. Well then, I guess I won't give a shit about your story either, game. Oh, Troika, you disappoint me so. Companions lore-wise. Character-made companions have nothing to add to the story other than their skills to navigate certain combat and non-combat situations. Companions you find along the way may have a line or two of funny party banter, but beyond their initial run-of-the-mill introductions, they got nothing.
Nothing, yeah, you got nothing.
That little anecdote about Elmo and Otis should tell you all you need to know about its characters and the role they play in the story, which is exactly none. Some of them have a little something to say when you go to important locations, like Emrydea Meadows, the City of Nulb, or the Temple of Elemental Evil itself. But that's as far as it goes. Because I love Troika, I'll just say this category does not apply. Companions gameplay-wise. It doesn't matter if you're a casual or a seasoned D&D veteran, when it comes to the array of companions available, Temple of Elemental Evil has got you covered. As we've mentioned before, you can solo the game, you can create an entire party of adventurers tailored to the finest detail to your preferred style, or you can pick up some scripted companions along the way. And some of these are pretty freaking overpowered if you ask me. Actually, Your Honor, I'd like to make an addendum to my video on the top 10 most powerful companions, please. Because Elmo is an absolute powerhouse of tanking that 100% deserves a spot on this list. I think companions are also way more important in Temple of Elemental Evil than they are in most other D&D games. And they are important for various reasons, not all of which will be obvious at first. Allow me to elaborate. In Temple of Elemental Evil, there is no shortage of "damn, I wish I knew this before" type of situations. And most of them have to do with your companions. One of them, for example, only accompanies you a limited number of times into the temple. After that, he just leaves the party the moment you hit the city of Nulb or Hamlet. And of course, he'll be taking with him whatever he's carrying at the time. There's another companion who will only join you if there is a druid in your party. And there's another one who seems to be OP at first, but while he's in your party, most NPCs in the cities will refuse to talk to you. Some people see this as an interesting design choice that adds a great deal of consequence and weight to your actions, but some others think it's annoying and unfair. I thought it was a pretty awesome way to keep you guessing, struggling, and bringing in new companions. The icing on the cake is that you can create as many characters as you wish, start the game solo, and then recruit your other player-made characters at any given time at the end of the welcome wench. It's beautiful. Secondary mechanics and user experience. Secondary mechanics in Temple of Elemental Evil don't go beyond your standard trading and equipping, and such as it is, it's not entirely disastrous. You can change characters on the fly while you are trading, and that's a huge step forward in quality of life compared to Arcanum. The inventory space versus amount of loot ratio is probably the worst amongst D&D games. But that's fine, if you're a hoarder like me, that adds to the challenge of the transitory stash, and there's some fun in that too. You can't compare items in a vis-a-vis way, and that's always irritating nowadays, but it's not like that was a thing back in the day. You can also write spells in Temple of Elemental Evil, and this is a very interesting skill to have in this game from the tactical standpoint. Consider this, enemy diversity is great in this game. Bad guys can hurt and incapacitate you in various ways. On top of that, dungeons, namely the Temple of Elemental Evil itself, are long. Like really long. And you can only get your spells per day back if you rest for more than 8 hours. And there are very few areas in the game in which you can rest without being ambushed. So yes, having extra spells is important to cover up for your party's weaknesses and to go longer without resting in dungeons. User experience has to be the evilest thing in Temple of Elemental Evil. Just selecting all characters and individual party members is a pain. It's inconsistent and buggy. Move the camera a little bit and boom, characters get deselected. Click on an area with all characters selected, only 2 or 3 of them will move. Pathfinding is atrocious, and companions keep getting in each other's way when you try to go through doors or take stairs. Hitting enemies that are visually behind doors that are fully open takes surgical precision, and that can be irritating to no end. Switching to your secondary gear causes your character to temporarily unequip his or her first set of weapons. If your inventory is full at the time, and spoiler alert, it will always be, then you won't be able to automatically switch between gears. Fuck you, game. Fortunately, Temple of Elemental Evil gets user experience right where it counts the most. Turn-based combat is intuitive and lean, and this almost makes you forgive all its other shortcomings. Almost. Quality of life has never been the name of the game for Troika, and Temple of Elemental Evil may very well be the worst offender. I can see some people pulling the plug on this one because of its awful user experience, but that was certainly not my case. If you're easily put off by inconsistent or poor UX, you should probably do a little bit more research before getting this one. Voice acting.
Foolish mortals! You have unwittingly released me from my captivity, and my soul is free! I plan to hunt down my captors, hated circle of 8, and squeeze the very marrow from their bones.
No, madam. One should always perform a proper introduction. I am Fernach of Ferd, a treasure finder extraordinaire at your service. And what brings you to Hamlet, fine lady?
I come from a much bigger city with a much larger church, and I miss my friends there on the coast of the Near Dive. Making matters worse, bandits are raiding in town with a greater frequency, and the villagers are not attending our services as much.
There's not enough voice acting in Temple of Elemental Evil for it to be a relevant review factor in my estimation. The voices that you do get are poorly voiced, poorly recorded, and super tropey. There are a few exceptions here and there, but they don't make much of a difference. I'd say voice acting does not apply for this review. Music. There's something endlessly immersive about Temple of Elemental Evil. Much of it has to do with the fact that you're venturing forth into a long dungeon filled with unknown creatures, strange characters, and, well, evil. And the deeper you go, the harder it gets to turn back. And I admit that I'm a sucker for games that are designed like this, but I also think the soundtrack might just be the unsung hero in this game. It might be understated, it might not have too many awe-inspiring epic tracks, but it has some oddly Pink Floydian and Tangerine Dreamian undertones that just draw me in like few soundtracks do. I am often reminded of the track of Kuldahar in Icewind Dale, and that's always a good thing. It does have its out-of-place thundering electric guitar in a boss battle track, and all by itself it's not much to listen to, but it worked for me. Sound effects and mix.
I'll do my best.
Yes, sir.
Okay, lady. Okay, lady.
This is a hell of a mixed bag. Some sound effects are amazing. They are well recorded, well produced, and consistent with their actions. I especially appreciate that there's a sound for when weapons swing and miss, that melee weapon impacts sound differently depending on the type of weapon and even the type of enemy. Bows and crossbows come across neatly, but some of the sounds some enemies make, especially monsters, are laughably bad or altogether missing. Also, most of the player's interactions with the game's interface are awkwardly silent. The mix is not great, but there are enough options in the option panel to make it work. Overall, I still think the Sonic experience is above average compared to most other isometric CRPGs that came out around the time. Graphics. This is a bit of a mixed bag. Locations, buildings, and landmarks are pretty impressive. Hell, I'd say they are even surprisingly ahead of their time. Some of these buildings wouldn't even look out of place in some modern-day isometric RPGs. The animation of the water wheel, the smoke coming out of the chimneys, the trees moving in the wind. Look at the irregular, worn-out tiles on the floor outside the church. This was almost 20 years ago, guys. Let that sink in. As for character and monster models, some of them are up to par with their peers in games like Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale, and some are low effort. Weapon and item design is a little bit disappointing. Even gear that's supposed to be top-notch and game-breaking looks no different from regular items. But the worst offender has got to be the interface. There are all sorts of issues with it. The font is too small and inappropriate, buttons look like they were designed for a different game, and the color palette and style of the interface is tonally inconsistent with the art of the game. Here's a quick comparison with the interface in Icewind Dale 2. I'd say graphics in Temple of Elemental Evil were mostly well above average, but there are a few things dragging it down. Performance and stability. I think this is the right time to remind you guys that this category starts where unplayable games end, and Troika games have always been on the verge of that threshold. And well, Temple of Elemental Evil might just be the worst of them. I had issues with it when I played it back in the day on my Windows XP, I had issues when I played it again on Windows 7, and on Windows 10, I even had issues of corrupted save files. And I'm pretty sure these occurred because of quick saves and quick load, so be warned. But users like Valerie Carmen, sure I'm butchering that, and Forgal7 stepped in and said this: I'm playing it right now, and it's pretty stable but not optimized well. Be ready and good luck with it. Do you mean earlier versions of it? I know that issues came and went, but the final version 8.1 they put out some years ago has always worked for me. And I must admit, friends, I said to myself, if this thing becomes unplayable at some point, these guys are gonna hear it from me. But nope, the GOG version with the Circle of 8 mod pack is decent enough. Decent. It's far from perfect though. It crashed a couple of times or 3, and it has a couple of very nasty bugs. For example, if you have scripted companions in your party and you move their portraits so that they appear before yours, you won't be able to update your journal or advance quests. There are all sorts of issues with selecting and deselecting characters, and even now, there are screen resolution issues that trigger when you die or when a cutscene comes up. It's playable, but still a little messy. Do check other reviews to see what other people's experience has been in this regard, because mine has always been frustrating. Other considerations and final thoughts. This is a tough one to wrap up, friends. I had a blast revisiting Temple of Elemental Evil. I still found its combat to be fun. I still found its main location to be immersive. I still think there are plenty of little choices that have an impact on how you go on about certain combat encounters and some non-combat situations, even if they have no relevant impact on the story. But it also feels a little too dated. Its simplistic and low-effort quest design, its mediocre user experience, and the overall genericness of the main quest hurt the pace of the game to the point that it turns it into a slog at times. If you're an old-timer, and for some reason you skipped this one, if you liked the Icewind Dale games because you're more about combat than anything else, and don't mind the story that much, then this might be a good time to pick up Temple of Elemental Evil and scratch it off your list. The Circle of 8 mod pack even adds new characters, locations, and challenges that take the core game to the next level. And I strongly recommend you get it. But if you hunger for games that put the RP back in RPGs, and given your precious experience with Arcanum and Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, you think that Troika might just be the right guys for the job, well, I have bad news for you, Sunshine. You might end up a little disappointed. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you're seeing in this channel, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Share the video, but most importantly, never stop gaming, but don't let gaming get in the way of your hopes and dreams. Bye everyone.